From the poor sap who accidentally discovered LSD to the first guy who walked into Dahmer's apartment, here are 10 alarming discoveries you'll be glad you didn't make. Human feet. Nobody wants to stumble upon a pair of human feet. This is an extremely disturbing discovery that nobody wants to make. Back in 2016, the Pacific Northwest shoreline, spanning much of the west coast of the United States and Canada, was home to a rather disturbing phenomenon. But it actually started in 2007 in the province of British Columbia and in Washington state. Of course, I'm talking about the feet that were washing up on shore. There have been at least 16 human feet swept out of the ocean and onto the shore in the last 10 years. Most of them have been right feet, and almost all of them have still been inside running shoes or inside hiking boots. This is probably the last thing you want to find while taking a romantic walk on the beach, some poor hiker's missing foot. One such unfortunate person was Charlotte Stevens from British Columbia, who had been walking with her family on Vancouver Island when her husband found a foot in the sand. She then told CBC News that her husband picked up the foot, brought it onto the beach, and the whole family just kinda stared at it for about 5 minutes, wondering what exactly they were looking at. Sure enough, the authorities showed up and confirmed that it was indeed a dismembered foot inside a shoe. As with many of the other feet, it was almost impossible to tell exactly how long it had been in the water, but they were able to trace the model of the shoe and thereby find out a rough timeline of when the person the shoe belonged to would have went missing. As you can imagine, there has been wild speculation over why these feet have been washing up. Lots of people blame murderers, human traffickers, drug cartels, and every other nefarious organization. But the sad truth is that it's more likely people lost at sea who have disintegrated or people who have jumped off bridges in Vancouver. Needle cheeseburger. How would you like to discover a needle inside your cheeseburger? My guess is not very much, but this is exactly what happened to a soldier based in Hawaii when he swallowed not just one but several needles that were stuck inside a hamburger from Burger King. That's one nasty discovery to make when you clamp down your jaws expecting a nice meal and instead receive a mouth of pain. The man was actually hospitalized for 6 days according to Huffington Post, after one needle pierced his tongue and another needle was found lodged in his small intestine. Obviously extremely dismayed by the whole affair, the unfortunate man sued Burger King over the incident, but we still don't know what happened to him. It's likely that Burger King settled out of court to keep everything hush-hush, and it's likely the man survived a few needles in his belly, but nonetheless, this is a pretty ugly discovery that I don't think anyone wants to make. It's like finding razor blades in your Halloween candy. Grenades in the donation bin. We are all familiar with the donation bin. You can find them all over just about any major city, and while most people deposit children's toys, old and used clothing, spare food, and anything else that might be useful to the less fortunate, some other lunatic donated 3 grenades to a local clothing and toy donation bin in the state of Massachusetts. This happened back in 2015, and it required that the state police bomb squad be called in to help the situation. The police and firefighters arrived at the plaza where the donation bin was located early in the afternoon after workers found what they had thought was a box of toys. Only the toys were shaped a little too much like grenades. After conducting a search, the bomb squad members deducted that the grenades in question were actually military devices from the Vietnam era. This was such a scary incident that it caused the entire area to temporarily close traffic and detour all vehicles around the scene. The good news is that the bomb squad soon realized that the grenades were actually duds and no harm to anyone, and so they took them to another location. The police launched an investigation to see how exactly grenades from Vietnam ended up inside a donation bin, but it's unlikely their investigation would lead to any results. The donation bins are pretty anonymous, and just about anyone can throw just about anything inside of them. LSD. The story of Albert Hofmann, the Swiss chemist who accidentally discovered LSD, is a pretty bizarre one. Albert died in Switzerland at the ripe age of 102 back in 2008, so I guess trying LSD hundreds of times doesn't have any impact on a person's lifespan. But let's go back to the 1930s when the doctor first synthesized the compound scientifically known as lysergic acid diethylamide, popularly called acid or LSD. He first discovered the compound in 1938, but he did not actually discover its effects until 5 years later. It all happened when the doctor accidentally ingested the LSD. It was while he was working with natural funguses and other natural plant compounds. He accidentally got a little bit of it in his mouth, and the trip that followed would change the world forever. Now this one really depends on who you are, but I personally would not want to be the person who accidentally discovers the most powerful hallucinogenic in the world. Can you imagine just hanging out in your science lab, you get a little bit of fungus on your lip, and all of a sudden you're transported to a terrifying world of colors and sounds and things that aren't actually there? It sounds pretty alarming to me. But the doctor actually didn't mind. A few days later, he deliberately swallowed a full dose of LSD and then rode his bicycle home while he let the drug take over his mind. Through the following years, LSD would become commonly known as acid and used all over the world as a party drug. TikTok murder suitcase. TikTok is more popular with young people than brushing their teeth. It should be no surprise that all kinds of horror stories are coming out around people using this app, specifically with people getting all kinds of bizarre discoveries caught on camera completely by accident. Well, in Seattle in June of 2020, a group of teens shooting a TikTok video discovered a pair of bodies stuffed inside of a suitcase. This is some seriously gruesome stuff that I could definitely do without discovering. According to a report from Global News, the victims inside the suitcase were a couple likely shot dead in early June and then disposed of. But the teenagers who found them had no idea what was going on. They were all at Alki Beach just having some fun when they uncovered the suitcase on video. Who knows what exactly they thought they would find, maybe money, maybe jewels, but they definitely were not ready for what happened when they unzipped the suitcase and opened it. You can hear them screaming in the video that it stinks, and since the incident, their little video has been viewed around 25 million times. The real horrific part of the story is the two people that were stuffed inside of the suitcase. According to close friends, they were nice people and the female actually had 4 children. As of July 2020, police are still investigating the incident and do not have any murder suspects yet. Tools of torture. This story is not for the faint of heart, and I won't even get into the seriously gruesome details of it. The overall premise is that 2 of the worst serial killers in English history were arrested back in 1994, but everything about the killers, their murder dungeon, and the things that they did still linger today as pure evil. The main guy we're talking about is Fred West, and he was responsible for the deaths of at least 12 human beings before he was arrested and afterwards killed himself. But the discovery that I definitely would not want to make, and I don't think anyone in their right mind would want to make, is what the police discovered inside, and this was dubbed as the House of Horrors. This was the murder mansion where Fred and his accomplice Rose did very horrible things for over 2 decades, and they did it in their family home. Just think about the most disturbing horror movie you've ever seen and multiply it by 100. That's how sick these people were, and imagine the poor guy who had to walk into that house and down into the torture basement and make the discovery of a buried trove of torture tools. One of the most alarming discoveries was a mask that had nothing but 2 nose holes, meaning the victim who wore it could breathe but couldn't see or hear. One of the forensic workers told local news sources it was haunting, and it probably still haunts him to this day. Bottle of witch urine. There's nothing quite as gross as a bottle of urine, but how would you like to discover a jar of witch urine, complete with nail clippings, hairs, and pins? Pretty alarming, right? Archaeologists in Greenwich recently excavated a bottle from the 17th century that would have once been used as a spell device, also known as a witch bottle. This artifact was once used to attract and trap negative energy, and its strange unearthing shows more insight into the type of witchcraft that went on in this early period in England. While this may not be overly outrageous, I still wouldn't want to be the one to dig up an old witch bottle that was several hundred years old. That just screams bad luck. CAT scans and a chemical analysis revealed the exact contents of the witch bottle. Inside the bottle was human urine, brimstone, 8 brass pins, 12 iron nails, 10 fingernail clippings, human hair, and a piece of leather in the shape of a heart. If I know anything about witchcraft, this is one potent recipe. Throughout the years, there have been around 200 witch bottles identified. However, they were all emptied of their contents. This is the only witch bottle ever discovered to be fully intact and still corked. Even more interesting is that the time period of the witch bottle is actually right around the time period of the Salem witch trials. According to archaeologist Mike Pitts, the discovery of this strange bottle is a harsh reminder that England in its early modern days was still a world away from the society we now inhabit. A squatter in the house. The last thing you want is to come home from holiday to discover a dangerous squatter had been living in your house. But this is exactly what happened to a family on Vancouver Island after they returned from a 20-day trip to the Yukon. The family arrived back home 20 days later to find all their belongings dragged into their front yard and the interior of their home absolutely trashed. The squatter went through their food, stole their dishes, broke everything, and left their house in a state of disrepair. This is according to the victims themselves, but perhaps the creepiest part of the entire story is that whoever had been living in their house for 20 days had been sleeping in their children's bed. But wait, the story does not end there. The family rented a hotel to stay in for a little while, and when they went back to their house a few days later, they were shocked to find that it wasn't a horde of squatters, but just one weirdo, and he was back. They called the police, and officers rushed to the house and found the lunatic hiding inside the closet in their children's room. According to the police themselves, the man who they found was already well known to them and had a propensity for violence and for carrying weapons. And this brings us to the final alarming part of the story. How could a well-known psychotic person be allowed to roam the streets and get away with this kind of stuff? Sea trash. The Mariana Trench is the deepest place in the ocean, and in April of 2019, the explorer Victor Vescovo made an incredible and alarming discovery. This daredevil currently holds the record for the deepest dive ever, going around 36,000 feet below the surface all the way to the bottom of the ocean floor. That's about 7,000 feet deeper than Mount Everest is high. Just think about that for a minute. This guy made it all the way to the bottom of the ocean, an extremely dark and inhospitable place where almost nothing roams. It's an alien environment with many creatures living there that we haven't even discovered yet. But when Victor touched down at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, he looked before him and saw human trash, something that looked like a ripped plastic bag just floating around where there should absolutely be no human garbage. This is obviously an alarming discovery, and I would hate to be the one who went 36,000 feet deep in the ocean just to find a bunch of trash. The elephant's foot. Some discoveries are deadly. Back when the Chernobyl nuclear power plant had a catastrophic meltdown in 1986, nobody really knew what to expect deep inside the plant at the core of the meltdown. Even after cleanup crews managed to get most of the situation under control at Chernobyl, don't forget many of them died soon after, and the first responders who didn't die of radiation poisoning basically got cancer and died later. There was still something terrifying waiting inside the plant. It's now known as elephant's foot. This is what happens when a nuclear reactor melts down and the uranium core reaches a temperature over 1100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's so hot that the zirconium cladding combines with uranium, steel, sand, concrete, and creates a radioactive lava. After a little while, this radiated lava melts through the reactor vessel, through several floors of the building, and all the way into the basement where it eventually solidifies. But the first responders didn't know this when they found the elephant's foot in the basement of Chernobyl. The mass was so radioactive when it first formed that it could have killed a person in about 300 seconds if they stood beside it. When the first people found it 8 months after it was formed, the lethality had gone down to about 5 minutes. That means you would have gotten a lethal dose of radiation if you were near the thing for 5 minutes. As you can imagine, that's not the kind of thing you want to find out the hard way. Which of these alarming discoveries would have been the worst to make? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for more awesome videos.